Shalom. And welcome back to part 2 of our teaching. We're teaching on the subject current events and Bible prophecy as it relates to the role and the task and the function of Yeshua the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And where we left off in the last session was explaining to you how that biblical history is prophecy and that the end was told in the beginning. That actually, if you want to understand and study Bible prophecy, the book of the Bible that gives you the most prophetic information is the book of Genesis. And so in looking at the book of Genesis, we see that there was a battle between Jacob and Esau regarding the birthright. And we see that Esau despised his birthright and sold it to Jacob. But when Jacob and Esau were being born, they're twins, that there was a struggle in their mother's womb. And that struggle in their womb was a prophecy that they themselves would be battling or being in conflict with each other. And Jacob was prophetically named because when he was born, he grabbed hold of his brother's heel, and that was a prophetic event. It was a prophecy that in the struggle between them, that in the end of days is when Jacob would ultimately prevail. And in prevailing, his name would be changed from Jacob to Israel, and only when he prevails will he have the authority to rule and reign. So when Jacob prevails, that is going to be when Messiah comes, and Messiah's return at his second coming is in the context to fulfill his function and his role to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Yeshua is going to end the exile of his people. When he sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives, he's going to set up his kingdom, and he's going to rule and reign with Israel over all nations, because Israel has prevailed in his struggle with Yah and with man. And so now, in seeing that there's a conflict between Jacob and Esau, that when Jacob had finished serving 20 years under Laban, that Laban's attitude toward him changed, and Yahweh told him to go back to the land. And going back to the land, he encounters Esau. And Jacob wants to be friends or make peace with Esau, knowing that Esau was upset, mad with him from when Jacob bought his birthright. And Esau is preparing himself and meeting Jacob for a war. He greets him with 400 men. And as a result, this caused Jacob to be afraid and distressed, and he was left alone. That's a prophecy of Israel in the end of days, that he would be afraid and distressed, and he would be left alone. That Israel would be isolated by the nations of the world in the end of days, and they would be in distress over trying and wanting to make peace with Esau. Yet what's going on around them when they're desiring peace is war is being made against Israel. And so the conflict between Jacob and Esau in the book of Genesis, chapter 32, where Jacob was afraid, distressed, and left alone, this is where Jeremiah picks up the phrase, Jacob's trouble. And Jacob's trouble is a term for the tribulation period. And the context of Jacob's trouble in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 3, is that Israel, that's a term for the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom, will return to the land. And so the prophecy is that Israel and Judah will return to the land during Jacob's trouble. And we saw in Ezekiel in chapter 34 and Verse 12, that the gathering of the exiles of Israel is in the cloudy and dark day, which is a term for the day of Yahweh, which is a term for Messianic times, which includes the tribulation period. And so, since the tribulation period centers on this issue, and because it's the role and the task of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel as the Good Shepherd, as we read in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 10, given that Christianity is looking for and expecting and desiring the return of Yeshua to set his feet down on the Mount of Olives and to set up his kingdom, this is an issue that we must understand, especially the last generation, if you believe that we are in the last generation. And I believe that we are living and we are of the last generation. And what convinces me of that is because I'm seeing in my world a battle over the land and a battle over the mountains of Israel. And that is the battle. That is the conflict that sets up the end of days events. That's a conflict that's associated with the tribulation. So let's see how this is so. First of all, in Genesis, in chapter 36 and verse 8, it says, "Thus dwelt Esau in Mount Seir." Esau is Edom. Esau is Edom. Esau is Mount Seir. Well, in Ezekiel in chapter 35, there's a prophecy against Mount Seir, or Esau. In Ezekiel chapter 35 and verse 2, it says, "Son of man, set your face against Mount Seir and prophesy against it, and say unto it, Thus says Yahweh Elohim, Behold, O Mount Seir, I am against you, and I will stretch out my hand against you, and I will make you most desolate." Mount Seir is Esau. And so what Esau is doing in verse 5, it says, "Because you have a perpetual hatred, and you've shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword." Well, what's one of the symbols of Islam? The sword. So he's shedding the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity. Well, that's an idiomatic expression for Jacob's trouble, or the day of Yahweh. The day of Yahweh, or the time of calamity. And so we see that Esau is shedding the blood of Jacob even and up to and during the tribulation period. And the verse goes on to say, in the time that their iniquity had an end. And so Esau is shedding the blood of the children of Israel at the time that Jacob's iniquity is at an end. Well, what's his iniquity? Iniquity is sin. What's sin? Breaking the covenant. What was the punishment for breaking the covenant? Exile of the nations. And so the end of the iniquity is the end of the exile. So he's shedding the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword at the time that Jacob's exile is about to be over. And so then it goes on to say in verse 11, "Therefore, as I live, says Yahweh Elohim, I will do according to my anger and according to my envy, which you have used out of your hatred against them." And catch this phrase, "I will make myself known among them when I've judged you." Who's going to make himself known to his people? It's Yeshua. Yeshua is going to make himself known to his people through this conflict and through the resolution of this conflict. And it says in verse 12, "And you will know that I am Yahweh, and that I've heard all the blasphemies which you've spoken against the mountains of Israel." And so the prophecy is Esau would be speaking blasphemies against the mountains of Israel. We call the mountains of Israel today the West Bank and Jerusalem. Then it goes on in Ezekiel chapter 36, and it says, "Son of man, prophesy unto the mountains of Israel." Prophesy to the West Bank and Jerusalem, and say, "You mountains of Israel, hear the word of Yahweh." Verse 2, "Thus says Yahweh Elohim, Because the enemy, now who's the enemy? It's defined as being Esau, who wants the mountains of Israel to be his possession, and he's speaking blasphemies. Thus says Yahweh Elohim, because the enemy has said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. The prophecy is that Esau would say the mountains of Israel belongs to him. Is there anyone in the world saying that the mountains of Israel belongs to him? I mean, it's in our news. It's front and center in our news. It's the issue that the European Union and the United States and the rest of the world is trying to deal with. How do we resolve this conflict over the land? And so what the nations see as the solution to bring peace in the Middle East between the Jews and the Arabs is to make the mountains of Israel a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Now, through the eyes of the Bible, biblically speaking, when the nations are saying that the West Bank should be a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, what they are saying biblically is the birthright belongs to Esau. That's what they're saying. And then it says in Ezekiel 36 verse 5, therefore thus says Yahweh Elohim, in the fire of my jealousy have I spoken against the residue of the nations and against all Esau, who has appointed my land for their possession with the joy of all their heart, with despiteful minds, to cast it out for a prey. And so Yahweh Elohim is speaking against Esau in the nations, who they've allocated and said his land is their possession. And it's the joy of all their heart. You know, for the Palestinians to have their state is the joy of all their heart. And actually, for there to be a two-state solution is also the joy of the heart of the Western nations, particularly the United States and the European Union. Why is that also the joy of their heart? Is because ultimately they would like to see a world governed through the United Nations under international law. And there was a two-state solution that was voted upon to divide or to share Jerusalem at the United Nations General Assembly on November the 29th, 1947. And so the reason why the European Union and the United States is advocating a two-state solution and to divide Jerusalem is not that they really believe that that is what's going to bring peace, especially since, if you know the geography of the area, that at the shortest point of the 67 borders, the shortest point of the West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea is 9 miles. Now, how would you like to defend your country and you got 9 miles to defend it from your enemy? Do you think that's very realistic? Well, they think that if they make that the borders, somehow the European Union, the United States, is trying to say that that's going to bring peace. And so why are they advocating that when any logical, practical thinking person knows that you're not going to be able to protect 9 miles from your enemy when they hate you, when they got rockets and they build tunnels and they do suicide bombings and all the other things? Well, it's because the United States and the European Union wants the solution to be based upon the original United Nations vote on November the 29th, 1947, and they also want the solution to be based upon UN resolutions, and particularly UN resolutions 242 and 338, which were passed by the UN Security Council after the 1967 and the 1973 wars. And in the peace agreements that Israel made with their neighbors, in the peace agreement with Egypt, in the peace agreement with Jordan, and in the signing of the Oslo Accords with the Palestinians in September 13th, 1993, if you look at the text of the agreements, it all says that this agreement is based upon UN resolutions 242 and 338. And if you look at the text that the Palestinians are going to submit to the UN Security Council, it says that we need a solution based upon UN resolutions. And so the Western world is in favor of a solution being based on UN resolutions. And so that is a part of the joy of all their heart, to see that conflicts in the world be resolved through the decisions of the United Nations. And so both Esau and the nations dividing the land is the joy of all their heart, but they're not doing it with peace in mind. They have despiteful minds, and they want to cast it out for a prey. And so in doing this, this causes, as it says in Ezekiel 36:5, the fire of Yahweh's jealousy. What's he jealous over? He's jealous over the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because ultimately, when the covenant was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it says in Genesis in chapter 22 in verse 16, and he said, "By myself I have sworn, says Yahweh, because you've done this thing and not withheld your holy son, your only son, that in blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. By myself I have sworn, says Yahweh." His integrity and his word is on the line. And the integrity of his word to keep his promise that he made. And so with the nation's desire to make the mountains of Israel a Palestinian state, with the support of the international community and the nations of the world to designate the mountains of Israel to be a Palestinian state, they are challenging the integrity of Yahweh Elohim, who made the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they're basically trying to call him by facts on the ground. They're trying to regard him as being a liar. And so he's going to show the nations who he made the covenant with and who is the rightful heir of the firstborn blessing. And so in doing so, this is why that this is going to bring about the judgment of the nations. The dividing of the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem brings about the judgment of the nations. And while the nations are being judged, at the same time that the nations are being judged, that's when Yahweh Yeshua, the Messiah, is going to end the exile of his people and gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And he's going to do it in the sight of the nations. He's going to be glorified. His people is going to proclaim him as the Messiah. And all nations will see this. And he's going to celebrate that event by setting his feet down upon the Mount of Olives and rule and reign with his redeemed people when he sets up his kingdom. So it is prophesied that the dividing of the land of Israel in the city of Jerusalem takes place in a period of time known as the Day of Yahweh. And the entire book of Joel is written in the setting of the Day of Yahweh. For example, we can see in Joel chapter 1 verse 15, "Alas, for the day of Yahweh is at hand, and as destruction from the Almighty shall it come." Joel chapter 2 verses 1 and 2. "Blow the shofar in Zion, sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble. Let the land tremble. Let the people that's living in the land of Israel, tremble. For the day of Yahweh comes, it is nigh at hand." It's a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. So twice the book of Joel is mentioning the day of Yahweh in the beginning of the book, and it goes on to say in Joel chapter 3 verse 2, "I will gather all nations and bring them into the valley of Jehoshaphat." Jehoshaphat in Hebrew means Yahweh judges. I'm going to bring the nations into the valley of judgment. and I'm going to plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations or parted or divided my land. The prophecy is that the nations are going to divide the land of Israel in the day of Yahweh. And in doing so, they're going to want to remove Jews from their homes. In Joel chapter 3, verse 6, the children of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have been sold to the Grecians, that you might remove them far from their border. The children of Judah, that's the Jews, that you might remove them from their border, from their homes. And actually the world is saying, the Palestinians are saying, that we can't have a solution to the conflict until we kick the Jews out of their homes. That the whole reason why we don't have peace is because Jews are building and living in homes that don't belong to them. They say that it belongs to the Palestinians. And so that's why every time there's an announcement of 200 homes that's going to be built in the West Bank or East Jerusalem, the United States and the European community says, we don't recognize this. This is illegal. This is not helping peace. And as a matter of fact, in order to have peace, those settlements must stop, and actually they must be evacuated. Well, you know what happened in August of 2005? 10,000 Jews were evacuated from their homes in the Gaza. Did it bring peace, or did it bring rockets? Or did they build tunnels? And so we've already had an example of them when Jews left their homes, that instead of bringing peace, I mean, all the people in the Gaza didn't all of a sudden, put down their guns. They built tunnels, and they sent rockets. And so, nevertheless, the nations of the world says, well, we can have peace if we can just kick the Jews out of their homes. How many Jews are there in the West Bank that would be in the lands that the Palestinians are saying that they want as a part of their state? About 300,000. How would you like to kick 300,000 people out of their homes? You think it's going to be easy and nice? And besides that, they don't want any Jews in East Jerusalem. There's an equal number of Jews in East Jerusalem. So how would you like to kick out 500,000 people out of their homes? How would you like 500,000 people in this country to be kicked out of their homes? Do you think they're going to be happy about it and just say, okay, I guess I'll leave? Somehow, do you think that's going to bring peace if 500,000 people in this country get told, well, you can't live in their homes anymore? Well, that's what they're saying. Well, it says that when the nations divide the land, it says in Joel chapter 3, verse 9, proclaim this among the Gentiles, prepare for war. See, the prophecy says when the nations come to divide the land and kick Jews out of their homes, the prophecy is to tell the Gentiles, to tell the nations, start preparing for war. Because the dividing of the land is going to bring war to the nations. So now we go to Zechariah in chapter 14 and verse 1. The setting is the day of Yahweh. It says, behold, the day of Yahweh comes, and your spoil shall be divided in the midst of you. Now verse 2, it says that Jerusalem will be divided. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be taken. And the last part of the verse says, half of the city will go into captivity. Into captivity means they're not controlled by the Jewish people. And so the nations are going to divide the land of Israel, and they're going to divide the city of Jerusalem. And so if that's what the prophecies say, is there any evidence in my world that that is happening? Is there any evidence that the nations are trying to divide the land of Israel and trying to divide Jerusalem? Well, that's front page news. And this is an issue, the primary issue that is related and associated with the day of Yahweh. And so then once this happens, I believe it will be a fulfillment of the prophecy. What's going to happen? Well, judgment of the nations. Zechariah 14 verse 3. Then Yahweh will go forth and fight against the nations as when he fought in the day of battle on his feet. Whose feet? Yahweh's feet. His feet will stand that day upon the Mount of Olives. Well, whose feet's going to stand upon the Mount of Olives? Yeshua. So Yahweh Yeshua's feet's going to stand upon the Mount of Olives. And the one whose feet that's going to stand upon the Mount of Olives is the one that's going to fight against the nations when the nations divide the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. And he's going to fight against the nations as when he fought in the day of battle. Now, what's regarded as the day of battle? The day of battle is regarded as when Pharaoh and his army drowned in the Red Sea. He's going to fight against the nations like he fought against Pharaoh. Well, the part that really we need to pay attention to and really pertains to us is what's going to happen while he's judging the nations. while he's judging the nations is going to be when he begins the process to end the exile of the 12 tribes and gather and unite his people from the nations of the world where they've been scattered, in fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel 37, 15 through 28, the two sticks becoming one, and he's going to bring them back, as it says in Ezekiel 34, as it says in Ezekiel 37, he's going to bring them back to the mountains of Israel. Why does he bring them back to the mountains of Israel? Because he's going to affirm to the nations that the mountains of Israel he promised in the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he's going to make a point to the nations regarding the issue. Okay, so if that's what he's going to do, and if that's part of the redemptive work of the Messiah, because we're told in John 10 and John 11 that Yeshua died for the ultimate purpose to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. He was asked in Acts chapter 1 how it's going to happen. Well, we need to know how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And just as Yeshua dying on the tree and shedding his blood was a part of the plan to have your sins being forgiven, well, it's also a part of your plan for him to gather and redeem you from all the nations of the world where you and I have been scattered as well. So what's the principles that govern this? Basically, it's this: that it will be, he will do it after the pattern that he did do it when he brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so do you realize that when you return to the Torah, when you study the Torah, when you study the Torah on a weekly basis, do you know basically what you're studying when you go through the first 5 books every week? Well, begin in Genesis chapter 12. What you are studying every week for the whole year is that there was a covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He had 12 sons. They go to Egypt. We're told how they get to Egypt, with the problems they've encountered there. We're told how they got delivered out and their journeys in the wilderness. That's what you're studying. You're studying that story, in the details of that story. Well, why are you spending so much time studying that story for? Because it's important to you, because it's your blueprint, because according to how the Almighty redeemed his people out of Egypt is how the Messiah is going to gather his people from the nations of the world where they've been scattered. And we can see this principle in Micah in chapter 7, verses 14 and 15. It says, "Feed your people with the rod, the flock of your heritage." It says, "Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old." Let it be like it was. And then it says in verse 15, "According to the days of your coming out of the land of Egypt, will I." According to those days, will I. That's future. Will I show unto him marvelous things. You see, it will be like it was. So you're studying how it was. And the reason why you're studying how it was is because you'll know how it will be. That you're given a test, and it's an open book test. And you're studying what's happened in the past so that you know what you're supposed to do in the future. We see this same principle in Hosea in chapter 2. Hosea in chapter 2 and verses 15 and 16, or 14 and 15. Hosea 2:14. "Therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak comfortably unto her." Verse 15. "I will give her her vineyards from there, in the valley of Achor for a door of hope." Now, there's a literal place in the land of Israel called the valley of Achor. But on a deeper level, the Hebrew word Achor means trouble. So, if I interpret this spiritually, it says, the valley of trouble, the valley of trouble, the valley of trouble, the valley of trouble. What comes to your mind? Jacob's trouble. So, the valley of Achor is, on the deeper level, a term for the tribulation period. Here it says that the valley of trouble is a door of hope. You know, in all the churches I went to growing up, they didn't tell me, look forward to the tribulation because that's your time of hope. But that's what this says. It says the valley of trouble is a time of hope. Why? Because it says, she shall sing there. Shall sing is future. She shall sing as in the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up out of the land of Egypt. She will sing like she did sing. Well, when did she sing? Well, she sang in Exodus in chapter 15. Why did she sing? Because her enemy, Pharaoh, and his army, he drowned in the sea. It says in Exodus 15, verse 4, Pharaoh's chariots and his hosts as he cast in the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. How did that happen? Verse 6, your right hand, O Yahweh, is become glorious in power. Your right hand, O Yahweh, has dashed in pieces the enemy. Who's the right hand? It's Yeshua. So Yeshua defeated Pharaoh and his army in the Red Sea, and the one that sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives, in Zechariah 14, verse 4, is going to fight against the nations as he fought in the day of battle in Zechariah 14, verse 3, because they've divided Jerusalem. And then it says in Exodus chapter 15, verse 1, then sang Moses and the children of Israel this song. They sang, I will sing. They sang, I will sing. I will sing is future. So what they're singing, they're telling us that they're going to sing again. I will sing unto Yahweh, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider, he's thrown into a sea. So when are they going to sing again when his horse and his rider is thrown into the sea? Well, it's called the tribulation period. It's called the beast, sometimes the Antichrist, the beast, and the beast system. We're going to sing when there's no longer any beast in any beast system that's ruling over Yahweh's people. And we will get the victory over the beast. And now in Revelation, in chapter 15, verses 2 and 3, it says, I saw those that got the victory over the beast, over his image, over his mark, and over the number of his name. And it says regarding those who got the victory over the beast, his mark, and his image, and the number of his name, verse 3, they sing the song of Moses, and they sing the song of the Lamb. When they get the victory over the beast and his mark and his image and the number of his name, they sing the song of the Lamb. Well, who's the Lamb? It's Yahweh Yeshua. And so getting the victory over the beast and his mark and his image is his song. Well, why are they singing for? Well, when Pharaoh and his army were drowned in the sea, then they sang and then they danced. And so when you get the victory over the beast and his mark and his image and the number of his name, you're going to sing. You're going to dance. Well, who's the one that gave you the victory over the beast and his mark and his image? You? Some human leader? No. It's the Messiah. So you're going to sing and you're going to dance unto him because it's his work. It's his song. It's the song of the Lamb. He died for the purpose of gathering, uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. And he's going to complete that work at his second coming. And in overcoming the beast and his mark and his image and the number of his name, those that overcome and sing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb, they have harps. They have harps. So the instrument by which you're singing is a harp. Well, what does all that mean? Well, if we go to Psalm 137, in Psalm 137 it says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down, we wept when we remembered Zion. Now, before I came up here, we all sang a song, and we were singing about Zion. And when you sang that song, what was the words of the song? Singing, clap, rejoice. You see, those are things associated with Zion. But it says, by the rivers of Babylon, that's exile, you weep. You're not singing, you weep when you remember Zion. And it says in verse 2, we hanged our harps on the willows, a willow tree. A willow tree is often called a weeping willow. And so in Babylon, when you remember Zion, you're weeping, and now your instrument that you're going to play to sing a song, a harp, is hanging on a weeping willow tree. And then it says in verse 3, for there, in Babylon, in exile, they that carried us away captive required of us a song. Babylon wants us to sing a song, and our harp is hanging on a willow tree. And they say unto us, sing us one of the songs of Zion. They're mocking. They're mocking. Your harp is on the willow. And they come to you and say, hey, sing us one of the songs of Zion. And the answer in verse 4 is how? Look, your heart's on the willow. How shall we sing Yahweh's song in a strange land? So what is Yahweh's song called? The Song of Zion. Sing a song of Zion. How? Yahweh's song. So the Song of Zion is Yahweh's song. And who's Yahweh's song? It's Yahweh, Yeshua is the Lamb. So Yahweh's song is the song of the Lamb, and it's the Song of Zion. But what is the Song of Zion? The Song of Zion that you're singing to, that you're clapping and you're rejoicing in, is when you're no longer in exile. In Psalm 102 and verse 13, it says, "You will arise and have mercy on Zion. The time to favor her, yea, the set time is come." Verse 16, when Yahweh builds up Zion, when he builds up Zion, he will appear in his glory. And who's the one that's going to appear in his glory? Yahweh Yeshua, right? He's going to come and he's going to return in great glory. And when's he going to return in glory? When he builds up Zion. But what's the building up of Zion? Well, Zion and Jerusalem are synonymous terms. So, in Psalm 147 and verse 2, it says, Yahweh builds up Jerusalem. Well, building up Jerusalem is the same as building up a Zion, because Jerusalem and Zion are one and the same thing. And so, the building up of Zion is the building up of Jerusalem, and it says in Psalm 147 verse 2, Yahweh builds up Jerusalem. He gathers together the outcasts of Israel. So when he builds up Zion, when he gathers together the outcasts of Israel, he's going to return in his glory. Well, what's his glory? Well, you won't, in order to know how he's going to return in his glory, you got to know what the glory is. And you go back to the Torah and see what's called the glory. It says in Exodus, in chapter 13 and verse 21, Yahweh went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. So they were led in the wilderness by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And so if we go to Exodus in chapter 24, verses 15 through 17, it says, Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount. And the glory of Yahweh abode on Mount Sinai. The cloud covered the mount. The glory of Yahweh abode on Mount Sinai. What's the cloud called? The glory. And it says in verse 17, the sight of the glory of Yahweh was like a devouring fire. The cloud abode on Mount Sinai, and the sight of the glory was like a devouring fire. So the cloud and the fire is on Mount Sinai, and the sight of it is like a devouring fire, and the sight of the glory. So the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is called the glory of Yahweh. But who or what is the glory of Yahweh? Well, in Revelation, in chapter 21, verse 23, talking about the New Jerusalem, it says, in the city had no need of the sun, neither the moon to shine in it, for the glory of Elohim did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light. The glory lit it, the Lamb is the light. So the Lamb, that is Yeshua, is called the glory. He's the glory. So he was the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that led them in the wilderness. So you got the principle, it will be like it was. Well, when did they come out of Egypt? What season of the year? It was Passover. So when is the end of the exile going to start? We call the end of the exile, we call it the greater Exodus, because it says in Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 14 and 15, it says, no, Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 7 and 8, the days come, says Yahweh, that they shall no more say, Yahweh lives that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but Yahweh lives that brought up, and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, from all the countries where he's driven them, and they would dwell in their own land. They're not going to say he's the one that brought them out of Egypt. They're going to say he's the one that brought them from all the countries. That's a greater exodus than what happened in Egypt. And so, in coming out of Egypt, when they were led in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, they were led by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Well, if you go to Ezekiel in chapter 20 and verses 33 and 34, it says, "As I live, says Yahweh Elohim, with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm and with fury poured out will I roll over you." You see the phrase mighty hand and stretched out arm? Do you associate that phrase with anything? That phrase was often used regarding what Yahweh was going to do unto Pharaoh when he judged Egypt. That he was going to judge Egypt with a mighty hand and with a stretched out arm. So now it says in verse 34, "And I will bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries where you've been scattered with a mighty hand, with a stretched out arm, and with fury poured out." Do you see what he said in verse 33? He repeats in verse 34. Do you know what it means when it's repeated? It means that it's destined by Yahweh. He's planned it, he's purposed it, and you're not going to change it. That's the way it's going to be. It's going to be twofold. It's going to be with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm. That's the deliverance of his people. And with fury poured out, that's the judgment of the nations. And then it says, "I will bring you into the wilderness of the nations." So when he brought them out of Egypt, where did he take them? On the way to the promised land, into the wilderness. When did they leave? At Passover. And so now when we have the greater exodus, when's the greater exodus? Jacob's trouble. When's the greater exodus? The cloudy and dark day. Well, if you study further, the cloudy and dark day and the timing of the greater exodus is going to be during the period of time known in what we commonly call the Great Tribulation, the 3.5-year period that precedes Yeshua setting his feet down on the Mount of Olives. It's going to be that period of time when he's going to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And it says, "I'm going to bring you into the wilderness of the people, and there will I plead with you face to face. In the wilderness of the nations, I will plead with you face to face. Like I pleaded with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so will I plead to you." I'm going to bring you into the wilderness of the nations. They brought him out of Egypt into the wilderness on the way to the promised land. And in the wilderness, when he brought him out, through Moses, he spoke to his people face to face. Here it says, in the future, in the greater exodus, "I'm going to bring you into the wilderness of the nations, and I'm going to plead with you face to face, like I pleaded with your fathers, so will I plead to you." So if you know how he did do it in the wilderness, you know how he said he is going to do it. How did he do it? How did he speak? In the form of the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. So how is he going to do it? In the form of the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. When did they leave? They left at Passover. So when is going to be the leaving in the greater Exodus journey? It's going to be at Passover. Now because of time, I can't go through all the scriptures to show you the details of it. But it's going to be the Passover that begins the last 3.5 years of what's called the Great Tribulation. That's going to be the Passover that you're going to leave. When they left in haste and they went in the wilderness. Here in Ezekiel 20, in the greater Exodus, you're going to have your Passover. I'm sure this church celebrates Passover. And so when this time comes, you're going to be celebrating your Passover here at the church like you do from year to year. And then once you've seen the signs, you've seen the dividing of the land, you've seen the abomination of desolation, you've seen an altar going up and an altar being shut down. You've seen these things already happen. You're not guessing. You've already seen them happen. That then you're going to do your Passover, and then Yahweh is going to give you instruction regarding this. But the general instruction is you go into the wilderness. And so a simple definition of the wilderness is where? It's outside of the cities. In other words, you don't go to London. Okay, and so I'm not absolutely totally familiar with all the geography of this country, but I do know that there's a mountain range that goes through the middle of the country. Well, that would be a good definition of the wilderness of the nations. So you have a great wilderness spot that goes throughout the country, where you could be away from the cities, away from London. So you go into the wilderness. And so when they came out of Egypt, and they put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost, how long was it until the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night showed up? Well, within 3 days, so let's make it more general. It was during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so when is the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night going to show up in the greater Exodus? After you do your Passover, that starts the Great Tribulation, and it's going to be during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's when the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is going to show up. Okay, when they came out of Egypt, how did they travel? In tents. So how is he going to take us back in the greater Exodus? In tents. And by the way, when celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, you know one of the reasons why it says you're supposed to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in Leviticus 23? To remember that when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they journeyed in tents. So I want to show you scripturally where it tells us that in the greater Exodus, that he's going to, that is the Messiah, is going to lead his people back in the form of the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And this is Isaiah in chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. And then I'm going to cross-reference, because I want to finish up my message by showing you the role and the task of the 144,000. And in Revelation 14, verse 1, the Lamb and the 144,000 are on Mount Zion. Okay? So now, Isaiah chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, it says, Yahweh will create his future. He will create, now listen to these words, he will create on every dwelling place of Mount Zion and upon her assemblies. How many? How many is every in all? It's more than one. So there's not one cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. It says on every dwelling place. Now, if it's every dwelling place of Mount Zion, what's the name of every dwelling place? Mount Zion. Every dwelling place of Mount Zion. There will be a cloud and a smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. He will create on every dwelling place of Mount Zion a cloud and a smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory, well, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is called the glory. Upon the glory shall be and it says in Hebrew, a huppah. Do you know what a huppah is in Hebrew? It's a wedding canopy. You get married underneath the huppah. So the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is called a wedding canopy. He's associating this event with a wedding. That's because the end of the exile is likened to a wedding. Jeremiah in chapter 33. Jeremiah chapter 33 and verse 11, it says, the voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride. At the end of the verse, I'm going to cause to return the captivity of the land. Ending the captivity, ending the exile is the voice of joy, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride. That's a wedding. That's the reason why upon all the glory is going to be a huppah, because a huppah is where you're getting married. And so the end of the exile is associated with Yeshua coming and marrying his bride. He's marrying his bride who he's redeeming, who her enemies is taking advantage of her. And it says in Isaiah 4:6, there will be a tabernacle for a shadow in the daytime from the heat, and for a place of refuge, for a covert from storm and from rain. You see, the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night is going to be your protection. It's going to be your refuge from storm and from rain. That's literal and it's allegorical. Literally from storm and from rain. And storm and rain also refers to the enemies that oppose you. And so now in closing the message and showing you that the dividing the land is the issue that will bring the judgment of the nations, while he's judging the nations, he's going to be ending the exile, gathering and uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. When he comes, he's going to return in his glory. The way he's going to do it is patterned after the way he did do it, and it's going to be a greater exodus than what it was. He brought them out at Passover. He will bring them out at Passover. They did go in the wilderness. You will go into the wilderness. They did dwell in tents. You will dwell in tents. And they were led by Moses, but how many assemblies do we have? Every dwelling place of Mount Zion, all her assemblies. Well, we have multiple assemblies because his people are scattered throughout the world. And so this is going to be the context and the role and the task of the 144,000. They are going to be leaders of the greater Exodus. So let me show you this, and in doing this, I'm going to close my message. In Revelation chapter 7, we have 144,000 who are sealed. And then, in mentioning the ministry of the 144,000, it uses Feast of Tabernacle terminology. It says, after this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude that no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues. Of nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues. The Feast of Tabernacles is called the Feast of All Nations. That's a reference to tabernacles. And then it says at the end of the verse, they have palms in their hands. The Feast of Tabernacles, you wave palm branches. And then in verse 10 it says, they cried with a loud voice, salvation to our God. Salvation to our Elohim. Well, in the first century, in celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, they went around the altar either 3 or 7 times, and in doing so they said the words, Hosanna, save now. Hosanna, save now. Loosely translated. Salvation to our Elohim. So that's associated with tabernacles as well. So we have 3 things that are mentioned after we're told about the 144,000 that's associated with the Feast of Tabernacles to link their ministry with the Feast of Tabernacles. Now here's a verse to link the greater Exodus with the Great Tribulation. So I'm going to show you here the end of Revelation 7, what it's linked to, how it's associated with the greater Exodus and the end of the greater Exodus, and then I'll be done with my message. It says, Revelation 7 verse 13, who are these that are arrayed in white robes, and where they come from? He said, sir, you know, they came out of great tribulation. So we're answering the question of who those are that came out of great tribulation. And here's how they're described, those that came out of great tribulation. Verses 16 and 17. They will hunger no more, they will thirst no more. Neither shall the sun light upon them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne, he will feed them, and he will lead them into living fountains of water, and Elohim will wipe away all tears from their eyes. Well, why are they crying? Because by the rivers of Babylon we wept. They're crying because that's what you do in exile. Why is he going to wipe away all tears from their eyes? Because there's no more exile. Well, is that the context? Yeah, because in answering who are these that came out of great tribulation, which is the last 3.5 years before Yeshua sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives, it's describing those that will hunger no more, thirst no more, neither shall the sun light upon them, nor any heat. And these people here are part of the ministry of the 144,000. Well, Revelation chapter 7, verse 16 is a quote of Isaiah 49, verse 10. So Isaiah 49, verse 10 is the answer of those who came out of great tribulation. So what does it say in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 10? They will not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them. For he that has mercy on them, which is called in Revelation 7, the Lamb, he that has mercy on them will lead them, even by springs of water shall he guide them. In the wilderness they were fed by manna, they were given water to drink. And look, he that leads them, they will not hunger nor thirst. In other words, he's going to feed them. He's going to bring them, he's going to give them water. But who are these in Isaiah 49 verse 10? Back to verse 9 it says that you may say to the prisoners, go forth. To them that are in darkness, show yourselves. And in Isaiah 49 it says in verse 6, it's a light thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob. It's talking about raising up the tribes of Jacob. Say to the prisoners, go forth. And when the prisoners go forth, those are the exiles of Israel. When they go forth, they're told that they will not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them. For he that has mercy upon them will lead them, even by springs of water. And that is the answer in Revelation chapter 7 of those who came out of great tribulation. Those who came out of great tribulation are the exiles of Israel that won't be in exile anymore because the Lamb is leading them. How's he leading them? by the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And how are they being directed? By the 144,000, because they are what I call the Moses company. And so there was one cloud by day and pillar of fire by night, and Moses led them in the wilderness, but his people are scattered throughout all the nations. So on every dwelling place of Mount Zion, upon all her assemblies, will be a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so the Lamb, that is the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and the 144,000 in Revelation chapter 14, they're on Mount Zion, which is a term for the camps in the greater Exodus. And in Revelation chapter 14, it says that they're playing harps in verse 2. Same thing they did in Revelation 15, verse 2. You play your harp when you're not in exile, and they're singing a new song. The new song is the song of Messiah. The new song is the song of the Lamb. So you know how you've been blessed in this message and hearing this message? There was a move of the Spirit of God upon people who formerly established this congregation, where there was a direction to return to the Torah, to return to the Sabbath, to return to the festivals, and you were taught about the two houses of Israel. Why was all that done? Why was that move done? Why are you sitting here in that congregation? It was for this day. It was to prepare you for this day and for this work of the Messiah. So don't you feel blessed that Yahweh's mercy is so great upon you that he would allow you to be a part of his work and his redemptive plan, and he brought you to be in this congregation to learn of these things and this fellowship? Well, for that, I believe you should give Yahweh Yeshua all praise, glory, and honor, because he and he alone deserves all our praise, glory, and honor.